If there ever is a settlement on Mars, I'm sure that one of the first things they'll open up is a coffee house.
It's one of the most complex beverages on Earth.
$2 for a cup of coffee. 1 cent goes to the coffee grower.
It's mountain grown.
Coffee is the second most valuable legal traded commodity on the face of the earth, after oil.
E preto pela cor do negro que deu toda essa riqueza para o seu patrão, né?
It's just this little seed and has this enormous political, social, and economic impact on human beings.
This is the epic story of a beverage that shares its birthplace with our earliest human ancestors. In this hour, we see how coffee spreads from the ancient world, becoming the dark medium through which social, sexual, economic, and political life evolves, fostering much of what is best and worst about our civilization. From the hills of Ethiopia to the marinas of Seattle, people around the globe drink 500 billion cups of coffee a year, half of them at breakfast. Every morning, everywhere, people prepare their favorite cup in their favorite way. For sheer pleasure, few morning rituals rival a good cup of coffee.
Coffee has been at the center of conversation for hundreds of years.
Triple grande, 2% latte?
It's a social, romantic beverage. It's a theatrical experience.
The experience of coffee alters cultures and lives every place it goes. Romances are sparked, revolutions conspired, all over this dark, potent brew.
It is black and it is clearing our brain. So it produces light in our brain. Then it is something that went through fire and it has a certain hellish connotation. So there is some black magic associated with coffee.
As the essential morning beverage, coffee delivers the largest dose of the world's most widely taken legal drug.
If tomorrow coffee were suddenly withdrawn from the world and there were no such thing as coffee anymore, people would go frantic, for one thing. I mean, they would begin to go like this.
From the bean to the cup, coffee provides a livelihood of sorts for over 25 million people. 100 million more depend on coffee for their survival. The story of coffee begins with a green bean, hidden in the red cherry of the coffee tree. Some call it magical, others say it's evil, but no matter how jealously or greedily guarded, neither kings, nor merchants, nor priests could keep it from spreading around the earth. For sooner or later, everyone is seduced by the irresistible bean. This is a saga which begins over 1,000 years ago, deep in the ancient forest of a land often called the cradle of humanity.
No one really knows who discovered coffee or when exactly it was, but we do know that it was in Ethiopia, that coffee still grows wild in the mountains of Ethiopia. And there's a wonderful legend of Kaldi, the goat herd, that makes as much sense as any other creation myth.
Isarraa kan ka'e nyaata sanirraa ka'e maaliif bunni kun maalirraa nama si'eessaa jechuurraa baramee kanaan bu'an jedhamtu immoo buqqisee sibiila dhaabbadhaa wanni kun waan gaariidha waan fuulduratti barbaadamu jedhee kan biyya dhaabsise isaanii kan jedhu taarikii nan dhagaye. Ijoollee re'ee tiksutu argee erga san immoo abbaa jabir baalbuu kan jedhamtu takka taattalee immoo biyya hundaafus akka faafalee kan jedhe isaanii taarikii kan kanaan dabarsinaa. Bunni immoo har'a buna coocee kana fakkaatu hin jiru. Akka kana immoo hin arga ijoollee re'ee tiksitu jedhanii. Bin zaman sana immoo namni fuudhee biyya akka faafalee biyya keenya qaqqabee abbaayyoo kan jedhan isaanii santu biyya qaqqabee biyya hunda akka faafalee. Har'as immoo wanni buna coocee kana fakkaatu hin jiru caalaa bunaatii nabbaariidha. Bunni immoo biyya kana akka baabii kana jiru akkana amma bunni kun akka kana argamee. Bunni immoo har'a buna coocee kana fakkaatu hin jiru bakka biraatiin argamu.
He suddenly felt all kinds of energy and excitement, and he started dancing around and singing, and he felt like writing poetry to his girlfriend and things like that. So that's how coffee was supposedly discovered.
Ethiopians are the first to gather coffee growing wild in the forest. It is likely, as in the Kaldi legend, that the coffee cherries are simply chewed at first, or the beans ground with fat to make an energy bar. Later, the Ethiopians brew the leaves with boiled water as a weak tea. It isn't until the 1400s that someone, perhaps accidentally, roasts the beans and discovers how good they smell. They grind them and brew a black, potent beverage. Ah, coffee.
Every Ethiopian knows coffee's birthplace is in Ethiopia. You know, Ethiopians are proud of the coffee. You know, from the not only coffee growing areas, all Ethiopians, they drink early morning coffee as a prestige. If you go to any Ethiopian house, they prepare coffee before any dish. Coffee will be family beverage. It brings friendship, kinship. The coffee is an heritage and a proud of Ethiopia's culture.
Haji Muhammad's granddaughter prepares an elaborate coffee ceremony that is centuries old. Only the women of the house can roast the beans. When they begin to crackle, she ladles them on a metal plate to be blessed by the spirits of fertility and prosperity. The ceremony commemorates the journey of 3 sheiks who went into the wilderness in search of God. When they were nearly starving, it is said, God appeared and instructed them to grind coffee beans for food. There are always 3 servings of coffee to honor the 3 sheiks. The first round is called Abel, then Tona, and finally Baraka, which means the blessing. The mistress pours the boiled coffee from high up to let the aroma permeate the room. She adds a little sugar, or sometimes salt. The brew is thick and strong, with some of the grounds still floating in the cup. The eldest is always served first. As the British trade in tea grows, so does the continent's taste for coffee. In 1700, Europeans are consuming 500,000 pounds of coffee. 100 years later, their consumption has grown to 100 million. And the French are eager to expand their trade. The opportunity comes when a young French lieutenant charms a royal mistress.
Initially, Lieutenant de Clieu was able to get hold of one coffee plant from the French hothouse, which was owned by the king, by seducing one of the king's mistresses, and she gave him the coffee plant.
Gabriel Mathieu de Clieu brings the single coffee plant on a voyage across the Atlantic, nursing it with tenderness and care. He shares half his water ration with the seedling during a drought and protects it from jealous passengers and other threats.
There was an evil Dutchman aboard who ripped off one of the leaves of his plant because he didn't want him, the Frenchman, to bring the plant over. There were pirates who attacked the ship, and he had to protect his coffee plant against the pirates. There was a big storm. But finally, he brings his coffee plant over. He plants it in Martinique. It thrives. And from that single plant, most of the coffee that's now grown in the entirety of Latin America probably descends from that one plant.
But just as the desire for coffee stimulates the age of reason and democracy, it also imposes colonialism in the Americas. The French, like other European nations, established large slave-run plantations to cultivate the precious bean.
After de Clieu brought the coffee tree to Martinique, it spread, particularly in French-owned islands, and one of them was named San Domingo, which is now Haiti. By 1790, half of the world's coffee was grown on this one island. It's really quite remarkable, but under appalling conditions by slaves who had been imported from Africa. In 1791, they revolted. The first thing they did was to destroy all the sugar and the coffee plantations. And as a result of this, Haiti has been the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
The slave struggle lasts for 12 years. In a vain attempt to regain Haiti, Napoleon deploys his troops. But they cannot suppress the uprising. It is the largest successful slave revolt in history. When Napoleon learns of his troops' defeat, he exclaims in fury, "Damn colonies, damn coffee."
It's ironic that the reason the slaves revolted in 1791 was that 2 years before, the French Revolution had begun. And in large part, the French Revolution had been planned in coffee houses, and coffee had been one of the germs for it, getting people to think and plot the revolt. So coffee, at the same time, was revolutionizing Europe, but also the slaves were revolting against the way they were being forced to grow it.
Wherever coffee has been introduced, it has brought revolution or change. Coffee, which has given so much pleasure to Europe, will bring enormous pain to Africa, where it comes from, and the colonies, where it's going. The irresistible bean is about to catch fire across the ocean, and it will transform the economies, ecologies, and politics of all the Americas.
Pangamaro, Hidemaro. Senekala luwo, Senekala luwo, Senekala luwo, Senekala luwo. Anije, anibara, anije, anibara, anije, anibara, anije, anibara. Senekala luwo, Senekala luwo.